over the Drake Williams Law Firm, drakewilliamslawfirm.com. Ryan Williams is looking forward to the revamp of the LSU defense, bring back the standard. Very much so. Very much so. That's actually what we're leading off the show with here today. Listen, for far too long, it is of my opinion that LSU defensively had not been living up to the standard that they have set over the last 2 decades. Guys, this past week, 20 years ago, you won a national title. Now, I know that Nick Saban was your head coach in 2003, but regardless of who the head coach was, since that time, over those 20 plus years, you had let it be known that, look, man, when you play LSU, you're going to play a fast, physical, determined, swagged out defense. And over the last couple of years, and last year was a lot better. I'm not going to take that away from LSU, Brian Kelly, or Matt House. The standard has not been set from LSU defensively. You have been, and your culture has been, somewhat of a really dominant offensive team. Run-centric at times until Jaden Daniels just started throwing the ball all over the place, like we told you in the preseason that we thought that he would do. Bringing back a guy like Blake Baker sets you on a path, the path, as Brian Kelly would say, to what I believe gets you back to the relevance of what you've been known for defensively for over the last 2 decades. I love Blake Baker. I mean, we've been talking about it all week. I think that he brings a schematic style, an aggressive style that lives and breathes here. You know, I think there's something to be said as soon as it was announced that you had a lot of players at Missouri talking about how much they loved him versus when a guy got fired in Matt House, how much they didn't really care for him as much. He can reach players. He can coach a really good defense. He can build a really good defense. You know, there was a video leaked, not leaked. I mean, Jacques Doucet from WAFB posted up there. We retweeted or tweeted it. Okay, or X'd it. I don't get the dynamic of Twitter anymore. But of Blake Baker and Scott Woodward embracing one another when LSU played Missouri and Como this past year, both giving each other big hugs and talking about old times. It is aligned to here. I will say this, because a lot of you that are either married or have been married will know exactly what I'm talking about. Your wives are normally undefeated. And it fits perfectly because you have a guy that last year alone, guys, let me set this up too. In the beginning of the year on my national show, Ruffino and Joe, I came out and said we were doing predictions. I came out and said that I am picking Missouri to finish second in the SEC East this year because of how they are built defensively. In the beginning of the preseason, and when we were talking about all this, got ridiculed by Tennessee fans, by the Rudy Pook South Carolina fans. I say Rudy Pook, but they came at me the most. By Florida fans of all people. Billy Napier, how's it going? The way in 2 years that Blake Baker built them defensively was the reason that I picked them. Now, did they have guys like Luther Burden and Cody Schrafer and all those dudes offensively? Did they have a pretty decent offensive line? Yes. That's not what set Missouri apart and them being the number 2 team in the East. It was what they did defensively. Guys, this past year alone, Missouri was 28th in the country in total defense. They were 25th in the country in scoring defense. Let me stop right there. Let me just stop right there. It's not as if Mizzou didn't play good teams. It's not like Mizzou didn't play good offenses. You take that LSU game out from Mizzou, guys, they're a top 10 or they're a top 15 defense. Jayden Daniels is the reason that they're sitting at the mid 25 range of total defense. Before Blake Baker got to Missouri, they were in the hundreds. Does that sound a little bit familiar to you? A team that had been struggling defensively in the SEC, who was in the hundreds in total defense, all of a sudden, here they are. And Blake Baker is emerging, and he's coming back to LSU. Now, you may remember Blake Baker back in 2021, okay, and the things that he did for guys like Damone Clark and Micah Baskerville. Damone Clark being the poster child for that in 2021 from the year that he had in 2020 and the revamp that he had in 21 and how great he played. I just think that you hit a home run here. I do. And I don't like – I never really like using that verbiage. I don't like saying there are home run hires until after the fact. There's only a couple of guys that you can hire that I think are home runs. But for me, and I will, you know, if Blake Baker falls flat on his face, I will be the first one here to say, hey, man, I was wrong. I don't think I'm going to do that. I think he comes back to a place that quite honestly needs him, that desperately needs him, and not so much on the field as it is off. What do I mean? Guys, you have a very fractured culture on defense. Very fractured. It's not good. It wasn't good. Matt House had led a defensive staff. He had led a defense that, quite honestly, he cannot get to them just as from a personal level. A lot of this game is not about what you call schematically at times versus being able to reach a player and get the best ability out of them. I mean, that's what coaching is. Because when you play man on man and you call a defense and you're running specific schematics, missing tackles sometimes doesn't really become a problem anymore because you have a guy who's built a culture of success. Now, what Miami fans will tell you is that when he was the defensive coordinator at Miami, that he wasn't any good. Well, that has a lot to do with Miami and Manny Diaz because they just weren't really good. Look what's going on with them right now. They keep paying for kids in NIL with NIL money, getting massive amounts of talent, and they still suck. But then Blake Baker goes to LSU and revamps a linebacking room. He goes to Missouri and calling defenses, coaching safeties. Guys, arguably not the two names that you would ever hear from safety play that was good. Guys, they legitimately were the most underrated unit on their team defensively. The way that they played. Choking out Tennessee. No pause. They choked out teams like Tennessee. Quite honestly, if they could get a little bit more offense, they beat Georgia at home. Blake Baker, legitimately the last 2 years against one time the national title winner and arguably one of the top 4 teams in this year, in Georgia, he choked out Georgia. You're not going to see more physical teams than that. Better coached teams than that. And he choked them out. You know, I went and listened to Kirby Smart's press conference this morning of when Georgia played Missouri. And the first thing he said was, and I'm quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but somewhat quoting, defensively, they choked us out. I'm literally using his words. You have a guy who revamped a defensive front seven to the top 30 in the country. Guys, if you have a top 30 rush defense in the SEC, you're going to win the game. You're going to make the playoffs. Now, the question that I've been getting from a lot of you is pretty simple. Because yesterday, our good buddy Wilson Alexander from The Advocate reported, and is correct, that LSU made Blake Baker the highest paid assistant in the country, 3 years, $2.5 million. Let me start off with this very quickly. I know I mentioned it in the beginning, but I would be remiss not to bring it up here again. It had been reported throughout the season, these three things, that number one, LSU did not have the money to buy out Matt House. That LSU did not have the money to go and pay buyouts for coordinators like Blake Baker, and that LSU was struggling raising funds. Those three things we told you all year long were BS. Were BS. They've always been BS. On Tuesday, I came out in this show and told you, what is the only thing that we have seen from a guy like Scott Woodward? What is the only thing, if there's one thing that we know about Scott Woodward, you may not, the LSU athletic director, you may not know anything about Scott Woodward. You may not know where he gets his haircut. You might not know his favorite things. You might not know his likes or dislikes. Hell, might not even know what he sounds like completely. But there's one thing that you always will know. Always. Money is not going to be a problem under a Scott Woodward tenure. Ever. Now, do they need to fix some things in NIL? I think that they need to fix organizational things. I do not think they need to fix the money that individuals and boosters are giving. Clearly. I don't think that. I think that they're going to fix those. I think they're going to bring in somebody who can overnight and instantly fix it. We'll talk about that when it happens. Okay? But I do think that will be fixed. But one thing that was never the truth, ever the truth, is that Scott Woodward would not go out there and buy out a contract at Mizzou to get a dude that they want. Number two, and the question that I have been fielding since 8:30 last night has been one, if only one. Is Blake Baker worth $2.5 million a year? Here's what I'll tell you. This is opinion. This is not fact yet, but this is opinion, not sourcing. If you do promote and take the interim tag off of a guy like Joe Sloan, you're not paying $2.3 million to keep a guy like Mike Denbrock. Now, let me stop on Mike Denbrock. I thought I heard Notre Dame fans and LSU media report that LSU refused to match Mike Denbrock's contract. What lies and truths are you going to believe now? Do you really believe that that's true? Seeing everything that you've seen, do you believe that that's true? Guys, this sport sourcing, it's not that hard. It really isn't. Finding out the realistic nature of how things have happened is not that hard. You really think that they wouldn't match Mike Denbrock's contract? Get over yourself. But back to the point of Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton. Let's make the argument that they are promoting and the interim tag is taken off. You're saving money on not going and having to pay a buyout for another OC. Actually, the truth is you're getting a little money from Notre Dame on a Mike Denbrock buyout. Okay? But nevertheless, you're not having to spend the money there like I think you would have to go get a new OC. Now, that doesn't really change the fact of you having to go pay out and buy out Blake Baker. That doesn't change the fact, okay, that you made him the highest paid assistant in the country. Here's one thing I do know. LSU is going to make over $60 million next year in TV revenue money. 60. Guys, $2.5 million a year isn't anything for a program like LSU. Quite honestly, you're not paying it. And if it fixes a defense, and if it makes a defense get you to a playoff, and if it fixes having guys like Garrett Nussmeier who can put up points, guys, there's a potential that you get a commitment today from Bryce Underwood, the number one player in the country at quarterback, the most dynamic player in 2025. There is a potential that you get him today. There is no money that you cannot spend. It is a relative thing. Are you going to lose a dude who revamped a defense that was one of the worst in not only the SEC, but the entire country? Are you going to let $500,000 not sway you to getting him here? At that point, then yes, you know what that sounds like? Let me tell you what that sounds like. It sounds a lot like some shit that Joe Oliva would do. You cannot be scared to go out there and pay what you need to pay. Brian Kelly is making $8 million more a year than what you're roughly, a little bit less, but roughly than what a Blake Baker would make. Come on. Saban is making 13 to 14 million more than his coordinators. What are we talking about here? So what, you made him the highest paid? When you brought in Nick Saban all those years ago in 2000, LSU was ridiculed for paying a guy $1 million a year, who hadn't done anything worth a damn at Michigan State. Hadn't done a Rudy, because Nick Saban was a 4 eyeglasses wearing, having ass, short little man who couldn't win in the Big Ten. He couldn't win. And you paid him $1 million to come here. Money is money, man. So what? If you identify, you know what I love about this more than anything? Brian Kelly and Scott Woodward identified the guy that they want, and they did not take no for an answer. To be honest with you, I think it's more of a positive than anything. Why negativity comes out in that is unreal to me, mainly due to the point of you're LSU. We do what we want. We do what we want. If you identified a guy and couple $100,000 swayed you in getting him, as Ross from Friends would say, now you on the podcast didn't see that, but if you are a Friends watcher or you were a Friends watcher, you know exactly the move I just made. You don't even have to. I'm sure you can visualize it. To the main point, I think that Blake Baker, is going to revamp what you do defensively. What kind of scheme does he run? I mean, just go back. Well, let me backtrack, because the LSU game is going to be a little bit different because of Jaden Daniels. They did not run the base stuff that they were known for running, but they are going to be highly aggressive. Guys, against games like